When Vice released the schedule for Season 2 of Dark Side of the Ring, this finale, centered around the final days of Owen Hart, it was one that I circled down as that's the one I really need to pay attention to. Okay, the Owen Hart story is one that needed a light shone on it. It needed to be spotlighted in great detail. We needed to hear Martha Hart. We need to hear what Owen Hart's son had to say about the whole story. And after watching that, I think that was exactly what we needed with regards to the whole Owen Hart situation. And I'll get to, running down what happened in this episode of Dark Side of the Ring through the video. But my main takeaway from the whole thing was, well, two things. First off, the negligence of the riggers that just got me so angry watching it. How they can be so lazy because they didn't feel like paying any more equipment costs and actually harnessing Owen safely. They were just like, oh yeah, just it'll be fine. And then the quick release on the cliff, it's just, you see stuff like that, and that's cost Owen his life. It's cost Martha, the son, the Hart family, friends, everyone. The wrestling fandom. It's taken Owen away from everyone because WWE just had to try and spoof WCW and have Owen be the Blue Blazer copying Sting coming down from the rafters. Just that whole notion that in retrospect, Owen Hart lost his life because WWE wanted to be petty and try and rip off Sting in WCW. That's basically why Owen lost his life, and because WWE were too negligent to properly rig him up when he was getting set up and over the edge. It's just, and to see Martha and everything she went through in the sun, and how they recounted the events of, how Martha retold, how she was told, and Jim Ross and what he was, recounting from being at ringside on the fatal night it happened over the edge. Just, it's so raw, and the way Dark Side of the Ring so brilliantly showcase this and spotlight the perspectives, because the main people you saw in this one, obviously Chris Jericho, the narrator, he does an excellent job. This episode, for obvious reasons, Martha Hart was pretty much the main person. Jim Ross got a lot of coverage time on this because, Jim Ross knew Owen very well. Additionally, Jim Ross was at ringside on the fatal night this happened. We had Jim Cornette. He was really good in this as well. Owen's son. We had the Godfather, who was his opponent on the night. We had a couple of other guys. So Jimmy Korderas, the referee. They got a really good kind of range of people to interview for this. And overall, they did an incredible job of showcasing this. And one of the main things that is coming out of this is the whole Hall of Fame thing. And as someone who likes to see both perspectives, I'm not someone who, if I think it's bad and you think it's good, I'm going to just crucify you unless you're a clown about things. But in a situation like this, with the Owen Hart Hall of Fame, I completely understand both perspectives. I understand why WWE would want to have him in the Hall of Fame, because this is Owen Hart. This is someone who gave so much to the company in the whole 1990s decade. Okay, Owen Hart did so much to the company, and they want to enshrine him in the Hall of Fame. But on that same notion, I completely understand Martha and the Hart family and all their perspective. I completely understand what Martha's coming from. The whole angle of, well, why should I allow you to glorify my husband when you're the same company who killed him? It's that notion, that mantra, it just I can't look past that. Honestly, I'm someone who thinks Owen should be in the Hall of Fame, but as Jim Cornette and JR said, from a talent and a pro wrestler, just pure pro wrestling standpoint, Owen should be in every Hall of Fame ever, as far as pro wrestling. But when it comes to the obvious thing that the company negligently killed, Martha's husband, Owen just shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame in that regard. Martha shouldn't let it happen. So that was an interesting takeaway, but really, this episode, once again, it just did a fantastic job. It really did. It went the same length as the rest of them. Now, as far as the Dark Side of the Rings, I didn't watch the Slap Her Around the World and the Road Warriors one. Really, the last one I actually really watched was the Benoit one. Because I only watched the more notable names, just because, I'm going to go back and watch the rest of them soon, but Anyway, the actual documentary itself, I'm going to run through this really quickly, just kind of, catch you up if you didn't see it. Basically, the first kind of part of it just runs over how Owen was so naturally talented. He's the youngest in the Hart, Hart family. He was so natural. He was doing the backflips off the ropes. Chris Jericho saw this in Stampede Wrestling and was like, I want to be like that. And when they showed Chris Jericho, or Chris Irvine, when he was a little kid, and he drew himself next to Owen Hart as tag team champions in Calgary, or Stampede Wrestling, that was so cool. Stuff like that is so awesome to see. So, yeah, they go through that. Then, you talk about how Owen Hart gets his big push. He goes from the blue blazer with the mask, and he goes to the feud with Bret Hart, and then they transition straight to 1998 and talk about how Jim Ross is like, oh, well, we desperately re-signed Owen because of the screw job, and we wanted to keep him in the company just so we had one Hart in the family, in the company. And then they talk about, one thing I found interesting, they're talking about creative, how Owen Hart was on the best few workers they had in the company, so they threw a mask on him because they had no clue what to do. So in the height of the Attitude Era, in 1998, they made Owen call back to the blue blazer. Creative was just poor for Owen Hart. So, yeah, they're talking about how Owen Hart is the blue blazer, and that gimmick was literally a way to spoof WCW and the Sting character, which, as I mentioned in the opening, that angered me more than anything. The fact that ultimately Owen Hart lost his life because the WWE upper management, Vince, Kevin Dunn, all the Stooges backstage, they thought that, we're going to have people come down from the rafters, not to try and do positive things for ourselves, but to try and have a crack at WCW. It's just pathetic, and to see what that's done to so many, and especially Owen, obviously, it's just brutal. So yeah, they talk about Martha Hart talks about the riggers and how she was told that the top riggers in LA would make sure that Owen was safe, and this was the best rigging in LA, and it was gonna be the best. He's gonna be completely safe. And obviously, in hindsight, when especially later in the documentary, and Martha went over the actual facts of the quick release on the little clip that was on Owen's harness, and they talk about how high up Owen was and how unsafe the rigging was, and oh god, the part of the documentary, there was really the whole kind of middle of the documentary towards the end bit. It was brutal to watch. Just having Jerry wasn't on the documentary, but JR reciting what Lawler looked like and reciting the whole situation. You had Jimmy Korderas run over how he was adjusting a turnbuckle in a corner, and then he's one of his hands on the ropes, and then he feels the rope just bounce up and shake, and then then Owen's just there, Owen's just laid out. So I mean, it's just the whole thing. I mean, how Owen shouted "Look out" as his final words, and yeah, and the way they told the story that Owen he was really uncertain about it. During the day of the pay-per-view, Owen's usually apparently very kind of lively, and he's a great guy to be around, but he seemed uneasy. That's what JR was talking about. So did the Godfather, who was his opponent. Just the whole situation, it just was uneasy. And then how they went on to talk about Jim Ross and how it was, as JR said himself, the most chilling night of his career, probably the worst night of his life, essentially. Being at ringside and seeing that, and how JR is saying, oh, well, Jerry nudged me on the arm, and he was like, look, and then Owen just fell down like a blur. Oh, Jesus. I just couldn't imagine being in that arena that night, in the Kemper Arena, Kansas City, Missouri, over the edge. Just, I mean, yeah, so obviously JR talking about how they couldn't show the ring for obvious reasons because Owen was dead in the ring. They couldn't show that on pay-per-view for obvious reasons, so they were just showing him for minutes on end, just having to kill time on live TV. And of course Kevin Dunn was in his ear, and he had no updates, but he was just trying to fill in time. And then they went into Martha Hart and how she promised a day of reckoning, and how she promised she'd be a fighter, and she went right to the spot where Owen had the infamous fall, which that was one of the hardest parts of the documentary for me, when they were showing the police photos from the rafters, and apparently they're showing Martha and the son going up there to where her husband and obviously the kid's dad infamously passed away. It's just yeah, it's just stuff that you don't want to really conceive and think about. It's just to think how helpless Owen must have felt in that situation. He's 80 feet above the ring, and you're on live pay-per-view, so you feel you have to, but you're not rigged up at all properly. So you're basically falling to your death, and you know that. And the thing that actually happened, and the way he fell down and it hit the way he did, it's just like stuff like that is just horrible. It really is. So, I mean, that's the basis of the notes. Then they talk about the legal situation, Martha suing the WWE, and how the members of the Hart family, because of their relationship with the WWE, they didn't want to have Martha sue. So you had people in the Hart family taking points in Martha and her legal her suit, and then hindering the Martha's suit and whatnot. Like, that stuff was, it's just interesting here. Eventually Martha got the $18 million settlement. Then Jim Cornette was going off about how WWE went on with the show, and they carted Owen out like he's a piece of garbage, and then that was that. And the whole thing was over the edge. It's like, once again, I see both sides of this situation, because if you're the WWE, obviously, yes, Owen has just tragically died in the middle of a pay-per-view. Okay, but if you don't do the rest of the show, I don't know. To play devil's advocate, if you don't do the rest of the show, you're gonna get hundreds and thousands of these complaints. You're gonna get the pay-per-view companies all pissed off, because then you have to sort things out. But at the same time, ethics, morals, doing what's right. A man who's been so loyal for over a decade just died in your ring so tragically, and you cart him out and go on with 3 to 4 other matches. It's just such a tricky one. And Jericho talked about how Owen would have had a career resurgence the next year when Eddie Guerrero, Dean Malenko, Chris Benoit himself, Kurt Angle, Edge, Christian, all these guys came into the company. How Owen had so much to give and all of that. So yeah, that stuff is really good. And then they finish off with the Hall of Fame debate, how Owen really should be in the Hall of Fame, but Martha's explanations just makes too much sense. So that was the dark side of the ring. Really, it's a tough watch. It genuinely is. It's seeing Owen Hart, seeing what he was, how much of a family man he was, how he didn't want to just give his whole career to wrestling. He wanted to do wrestling and then do other stuff, but it was so tragically taken by the negligence and the company wanting to spoof WCW. Just ridiculous. So yeah, if you enjoy the video, be sure to like, comment, sub. You guys know the drill. See ya.